Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Have you ever discovered a book series that you have heard about for years is pretty amazing, but you're intimidated by how long it is? But one day, the overwhelming curiosity becomes too strong, and you give in, and you find out, man, this was really good, and you start to wonder what took you so long to give the series a shot. For me, that book series is Malazan Book of the Fallen, which begins with Gardens of the Moon. But before we get into that, let's get to our writing update for the week. For the week of July 7th through the 13th, I wrote 5,544 words, which brings the project total up to 120,647 words. Naturally, I am of two minds regarding this number because on one hand, I am glad to have reached my minimum target of 5,000 words for the week. On the other hand, I feel guilty for not writing more when I'm on summer break and could feasibly do so. Every day is different, of course, and just because I sit down with the intention of writing each morning doesn't necessarily mean that each morning is going to play out the same. Some days you sit down with plenty to say, and some other days you sit down and stare at a blank page for an hour wondering how you've ever managed to string two sentences together. However, it is better to view progress as positive, and while I do stand by the fact that I have room to improve on my writing output and speed, I'm not going to beat myself up over it. Moving on, let's talk about Gardens of the Moon because I just finished this book recently and I'm super excited about it. This is the first entry in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, which started in 1999 with the publication of Gardens of the Moon and concluded in 2011 with the 10th book, The Crippled God. While Malazan Book of the Fallen is the main series, I will note that the Malazan franchise actually consists of multiple series and has two authors. The first author is Steven Erikson, who wrote this main series, and then there is Ian Esselmont, who started his own entries in the Malazan universe with Knight of Knives in 2004, and that serves as the first book of 6 in the Novels of the Malazan Empire series. One of the most interesting background elements of this franchise is that Erikson and Esselmont actually co-created the world of Malazan in the early 1980s to serve as a backdrop for a role-playing campaign. As they developed their world and expanded the complexity, they eventually developed a movie script called Gardens of the Moon, but they were unsuccessful in finding interest for development of the film. Erikson and Esselmont then decided to each write their own stories set within the shared world, and Erikson began writing Gardens of the Moon in the early 90s, 91 to 92, but the book wasn't released until 1999. And so during that intervening span, he wrote several non-fantasy novels, which I imagine helped him eventually get the series launched. And when he sold Gardens of the Moon, he agreed to a contract for 9 additional volumes, thus cementing the future of the series. And by the way, good luck to anybody nowadays trying to get a 10-book contract. Here in the present, both Erikson's and Esselmont's original series have been concluded for a while, but they have continued developing and writing other projects set within the same universe. As of right now, July 2025, there are a total of 26 published works, with another one set to release in October of this year, and apparently another 7 to be announced projects underway in some capacity. So to say that the Malazan series is expansive would obviously be an understatement, and with so many books to get through, I can understand why a potential reader might be intimidated, since I was one of those people until fairly recently. While all the books by Erikson and Esselmont are equally canonical, which I think is really cool, I am currently just focusing on the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, since I think it's fair to say planning to read 9 more books in this one series is enough for the time being. I will say another potential barrier to entry for readers into this series is the writing style, specifically the pacing and the number of points of view presented to the reader. I had actually purchased Gardens of the Moon years and years ago, and then I tried to start reading it a couple years back, and I think I got about 40 pages in and was really turned off by the style because it was very different from modern fantasy books. But as my disgruntlement with modern fantasy has grown, I decided earlier this year to pick up the book again, and now that I have finished it, I get it. I fully understand why it's such a lauded series. I actually read pretty much the whole book between sets at the gym, and now that I've started with book 2, I'm just going to continue doing it this way. I think it's kind of fun because I can work my body and my mind at the same place at the same time. I'm also trying to start a movement, so if you go to the gym, read a book between sets. Don't scroll on your phone. Try to engage your brain a little bit more. As I've grown as a writer, so too have my tastes as a reader changed. I strongly dislike when a writer feels the need to explain every single detail to the reader, especially when it comes to how magic functions, and I think everyone knows to whom I am referring in this regard. As a reader, I prefer an author to trust me me to be intelligent and to actually have to put in work to understand what is happening in a book and or series. And this mindset obviously translates over to my writing as well. Personally, I believe this notion of over-explaining is a huge detriment to modern fantasy and storytelling in general, as it removes the sense of wonder that sits at the heart of the genre. In my opinion, which is of course objectively correct, the best of fantasy makes readers actually ask questions and think deeply about the story with which they are interacting. The more you spoon feed your audience, whether that be with your magic system or the morals of your story, the more you diminish the wonder of the story. It should not surprise you then that I greatly appreciate how Erikson does not hold your hand at all. The characters interact with their world and one another in an astonishingly authentic manner, so much so that the expectation is that you, the reader, will probably not understand what exactly is happening at any given moment, which I actually like. I want characters to speak to each other in the context of their in-universe knowledge and not simply for the benefit of the audience. Imagine in real life if two people who go to church together and therefore have all the context of their shared religious belief just stopped to explain to each other the background of their church and the story of Jesus on a given Sunday. That would be really silly because it's not how real people act. Now imagine you are a silent observer with no background knowledge of their religion and you're watching their conversation unfold. You wouldn't be able to ask questions and make sure that you understand whatever potential theological and cultural terms they're throwing around. You just have to make sense of it as you go. That is what being a reader is. We are silent observers of a world and characters playing out before us. We can't stop and ask the characters questions, and I think some authors have a tendency to overcorrect in this context by having their characters either narrate or explain out loud concepts on which they normally wouldn't ruminate. And now I'm not saying that you should never provide context for your fictional elements, because readers do need some knowledge to grasp onto the world that you've created, but the more authentically information can be presented from the lens of character, the better. Nothing brings a scene to a screeching halt like having a character explain how his magic works in the middle of a gunfight. The lost metal. Anyway, back to Gardens of the Moon. I'm going to do my best to give a very brief general plot summary of how the book is set up at the beginning and where things go from there. But as you can imagine, there are a lot of moving parts and I'm going to leave out a lot of stuff. Also, there might be some spoilers involved, but the book did come out in 1999, so I think we're past the statute of limitations on spoilers. 7 years prior to the story beginning, the Emperor of the Malazan Empire and his closest advisor were killed by the head of the Imperial assassins called the Claw, who then took the throne and became Empress Lysine. The Empire in general has been characterized by war and conquering, and this continues into the present. A multitude of conflicts are woven together amongst this greater backdrop of war and the Malazan Empire. First, we have scheming gods who have fairly inscrutable goals that I imagine will become more clear as I progress in the series, which I actually really like that as well. I enjoy not knowing what these beings are doing because they're gods. They're not humans, and I'm not supposed to understand them like humans. So to have their machinations be beyond the knowledge of both the human characters and the audience feels good. It feels mysterious. It feels wondrous. Right away at the start of the story, we see the Rope, the god of assassins, possess a girl who then becomes known as Sari, and she goes off to join the war on the continent of Genabacus. At the same time, we're introduced to Ganos, Paran, not sure. I say Paran, so that's how I'm going to refer to him from now on. He is the son of a noble house, and he comes under the service of Adjunct Lorne, who acts as a direct arm of the Empress herself. Pretty early on, 2 years go by in the story before we connect with the main Malazan forces we see in this book. Among them, we have the Bridge Burners, which is a squad of near legendary status led by Sergeant Whiskeyjack, as well as several mages, including a woman named Tattersail. Sari also finds her way into the Bridge Burners, and pretty much everyone around her can see that something is off about her, but due to the various schemes at play, she's able to stay with the squad and pursue her own goals, which are actually the goals of the Rope and the god he serves, Shadow Throne. Obviously, there are a lot more characters involved here, but I'm going to keep moving on with the main events. The first section of the book concerns the Malazan siege of Pale, one of the last standing free cities on Genabacus. For 3 years, the Malazan forces have held the siege, but they have been unable to directly attack due to the presence of Moonspawn, which is a black mountain floating above Pale and is in actuality a city of its own within the mountain. And at long last, the time for the battle commences, and it is incredibly cinematic. This is definitely one of Erikson's biggest strengths as a writer. The battles, whether they're between armies or just two people, are wonderfully realized. They're gritty, brutal, and vivid in the way that they're written. And then here at the Battle of Pale specifically, the Empire mages are blasting moon spawn while its lord Animander Rake, who is a super powerful immortal being of the Tissot race, is countering with his own magic and blasting the people below. And then while the moon is being besieged, thousands of great ravens, which are the size of mules, come swooping down to attack the Malazan, and then a demon also emerges and lays waste to people, and there's all this magic flying back and forth and all these people fighting and dying, and it's amazing. My actual reaction while reading the scene was literally just, oh my god, this is incredible. There's also treachery amongst the Malazan mages, with High Mage Teiskren using the cover of the fight to kill off some of the other mages and some of the soldiers, because part of Lassine's machinations as the Empress calls for killing off anyone and everyone who might be loyal to the old Emperor, which actually includes the Bridge Burners and most of the Second Army that we're following right now, whose commander, High Fist Duyek, is seen as the biggest threat to the Empire from within. Anyway, the Malazans do succeed in capturing Pale, and Moonspawn moves off from the city. We don't know for sure if it's retreat or just kind of a tactical move on Rake's part. Then there's a little light slaughter committed against the citizens, and then we kind of move on to Darujhistan, the last free city on Genebacus. Most of the story from here on out takes place in or around Darujhistan, with a few diversions, and the cast of characters expands to include thieves, assassins, nobles, and other people in the city, alongside Paran, Sari, the Bridge Burners, and many more. Meanwhile, Adjunct Lorne is off on her own quest because she's seeking the barrow of a mythical Jagut tyrant who lived roughly 300,000 years prior and was sealed away by his own people. She is joined by Onos Tulin, an immortal of the Talan Imas race. The adjunct is seeking the barrow in order to unleash the tyrant, as he can hopefully be turned toward the task of destroying Darujhistan. As a side note, you can probably tell there are a lot of proper nouns and new names in this story, and I don't necessarily always know how they're officially pronounced, so I apologize if I get any of them wrong. And you can probably tell there are a lot of different races at play here that are not just human, and all of them are generally more powerful than humans. The Jaghut, or Jagut, or however they're pronounced, the Talan Imas, the Tistandi, these are just some of the multitude of non-human and typically immortal races in this story. Something a potential reader of Malazan should understand is that while the human characters are well realized, interesting, and worth following, the greater scope of the story is concerned with the bigger picture of empires and cities and these ancient races. Darujhistan especially is effectively a character itself, developed through the many lenses of both its own residents and the Malazan soldiers we follow. And of course, eventually everything comes to a head in Darujhistan, with all of the characters playing a role in the fate of the city. Bottom line, there's a lot going on in this book, and it's impossible to fully summarize it in a 10-minute video, so I'm going to leave it here for now. This genuinely is a story that you have to experience for yourself to fully understand and appreciate the scope of it. Personally, I would recommend it to everyone because I think challenging yourself with a complicated read is a good thing. But to narrow down the recommendation, I would say you should check it out if you are a fan of long epic fantasy series with a lot of machinations going on behind the scenes. And if you've read all of the Wheel of Time series, which is 14 books, 15 if you count the prequel, you can definitely read Malazan, and there's also the added perk of the series being complete. Also, if you're like me and you don't like being beaten over the head with explanations, you will definitely enjoy this book, though you do need to commit to it. Like I said, I initially bounced off the book because the style was different, but when I came back to it with a more open mind, I absolutely loved it. This book is definitely now one of my all-time favorites, and I'm confident I'm going to enjoy the whole series. So confident, in fact, you might have noticed I've already purchased all of the books, and they now sit here on the shelf of honor. But anyway, I believe that is all for today. As always, thanks for stopping by. I hope my rambling and possibly incoherent praise for Guardians of the Moon has intrigued you. I feel like I can't adequately express how much I enjoyed this book considering the state of modern fantasy, and so like I said, if you enjoy books that are complicated and they expect you to work for it, you will enjoy this book. And if you liked this video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Leave a comment below if you've read or want to read this book. I would be happy to procrastinate from actual writing to spread the good word of Malazan. As always, I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you here in the next video.